Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, Widowhood. Our guest today is Mike Bernhardt, and he is the editor of Voices of the Grieving Heart, an anthology of poetry about grieving the death of the people we love. 83 people from around the world contributed poetry, essays, and artwork to share their journey through loss, grief, transformation, and healing. Mike is a certified grief educator and has volunteered as a grief support facilitator. The poems that he is going to share in this book are going to let you know that you are not alone. There are different ways in which the people that are sharing their stories about their loved ones, but these poems are so heartfelt. Not about being a super great poet, but just being able to express your feelings. You will hear your voices in these poems. Let's get into this conversation now. Hello, Mike. Welcome to the Widowhood.
Well, thank you for having me here.
So you say thank you for having me. Like when you hear welcome to the widowhood, if there was a ticker tape across your head, what am I not seeing that you thought of instantly hearing that?
I think it's just really good to be here to be able to share my experiences. My book, of course, but really just my experience of grief. And, if that can help somebody, then I'm really glad to share it here.
Hmm. And thank you for that. When you say your experience of grief, what is that predominantly related to?
Well, the most recent experience was my mother's death last year, last May, almost, I guess we're getting on to a year. But the biggest one for me was my first wife died in 1991, which was now 34 years, actually a couple of days ago, April 7th.
Hmm.
So yeah, we've been married for 7 years. I was 34 when she died. She was 31. And it was devastating, as anyone who's lost a spouse can probably imagine. So
It is.
that's
And
what has
does
me
it
here.
seem like that much time has passed when you say those numbers, or what does that look like for you?
I mean, yes and no. It is a really long time. I mean, I was half as old as I am now. So in fact, I'm now at the point where pretty much that she's been gone more time than I was alive when she died, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Those are weird things to track, but I seem to do that.
It
Um,
is. And when you say weird things to track, for me, I feel like my late husband's passing is the benchmark. I say, was it before or after Mark's passing, that life that had become a timeline? Can you relate to that?
yeah, because my whole life changed, and not just temporarily. I mean, they were permanent changes in the way I wanted to live my life after she died. It took time to get there,
Hmm.
but there was just sort of this, yeah, it's kind of like the meteor that killed off the dinosaurs. It's like the whole world changed when my wife died, and it was obviously very sudden. And she died pretty much overnight. So it was a very unexpected thing. She was born with a congenital heart problem. And so we knew, I mean, strangely, our first date, she told me all about it. We talked for hours, the whole thing. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. But she was very vivacious and just lived life to the best that she could. It was a pretty serious problem, but it didn't affect her attitude. And so we just figured she had decades, that she wouldn't live to be an old woman, but we figured she'd live into her 60s. And then she started to have some issues. She took a new medication to deal with some fibrillation problems. A lot of people, I'm sure, know what atrial fibrillation is. But she had a bad reaction to that medication, and she had a ventricular fibrillation, which is not good. That's like cardiac arrest territory. And
Right.
that, so took her to the hospital. I was there all night. I went home in the morning just to get a little sleep. Some friends of mine stayed with her. And as soon as I got home, I got a call that she'd passed.
Wow. And thank you for sharing that. And you said your life changed dramatically. Someone listening to this podcast, they're going, that's a long time ago. It probably wasn't that bad. What would you say to them in that statement?
I would say it was that bad. Yeah. It was just like the whole world crashed out from under me, you know. And yeah, we were close, you know, we loved each other. We thought we had plenty of time. And then she was gone. And it's like I didn't know how was I even going to live, you know, let alone find happiness again.
What were those steps for you in finding out how to live again?
I think it was time, but not just time. It was time combined with really letting my grief take me where it was going to take me. I think I was kind of fortunate. I mentioned to you earlier that I was unemployed at the time. I was actually kind of self-employed. So I did have work, but I didn't have a lot. And I just didn't want to work. I had a little bit of savings. It lasted me for a while, but not that long. I just honored my grief every second. I took walks. I cried a lot, tried to read books that would help. And we'll get to that. Maybe, you know, that sort of led to the book that I ended up publishing. But it was a lot of just not running from the grief, not running from the pain, not wallowing in it exactly, but just letting it take me when it needed to take me, and just kind of having some faith. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I am a spiritual person. Just having faith that somehow I was going to be okay.
Mhm.
And in my case, the other thing that helped was I felt her presence with me very strongly. In fact, to the point that setting up a memorial service, I could hear her in my head telling me what she wanted, who she wanted sitting next to me. I went to a Unitarian church where I wanted to have a celebration of life for her. And they had this beautiful room with a big stone fireplace and giant picture windows looking out onto the hills. And I mean, this little room was gorgeous. It could hold like 50 people. She said, it's not big enough. It was like, I don't know who's going to come. You know, how many people are going to come? Well, so I said, okay. So I asked for the main chapel, and we had almost 100 people show up. So I didn't know. I just trusted her, you know.
And her name?
Susan was her name.
Susan. Thank you for sharing that. Mike, from your lived experience, some misnomers that people have as far as men grieving?
I think I mean, it might be true for some men, you know, that men will tough it out, that they won't feel their feelings. Yeah, well, I felt my feelings. And, you know, it's interesting because before she died, like before she got sick, I sometimes would imagine, because we knew it was more real that she could go than me, just because I mean, anyone can go, but because she had something that really could kill her. You know, I would imagine how I would feel if she died, and that I'd be okay, that it'd be, you know, I'd be sad, but I'd get used to it. And yeah, it wasn't anything that it was just absolutely devastating.
That
Um,
part, because people think, well, I could imagine. And for me, I'd attended funerals, but I had no comprehension of the depth of that pain, the
yeah,
depth of devastation, the inability to hear their voice one more time, to have another conversation. That I say untethering of my soul from him and trying to exist in his absence. It
yeah,
is devastating.
yeah. I mean, you know, people say that, and I would say, that, when she died, a part of me died. And it's really true. I mean, it literally is true because there is a part of you that is connected to them. Part of your identity is your relationship with them.
Yes.
That's gone. I mean, you could say in some abstract way your relationship is still there, and there's new agey people that would say, well, the body's gone, but this, and it's like that your body doesn't care that the spirit's still there. Your body feels it like, you know, there's a part of me that is gone. Like somebody cut off my arm.
Yes. What was your journey from that devastation to getting to a place to even write a book?
I think, I did a lot of things. I mean, I said I took walks, but I had already been seeing a therapist about some issues. So I kept seeing her and she was good. She understood grief, which not every therapist does. So that was helpful. I also attended a grief support group every week. It was an hour drive, but I went every single week for a year. And that was run by it was called the Center for Attitudinal Healing. I don't think they're really around anymore, but they were based in this place about an hour from me. And it was the Gerald Jampolsky was he's gone now, but he wrote a book called Love is Letting Go of Fear. And the basic framework of that group was about compassion and love. It was a drop-in group, so it wasn't like there was a syllabus or something that you'd go through like a lot of grief support groups tend to be kind of more educational. This was just come, share, listen to other people, and that was it, and just sit in community with other people. And it wasn't just spouses, a number of people were, but there was somebody else who lost their brother, their best friend, it was different kinds of losses. But the thing we all had in common, though, was we wanted to hear other people's stories and tell our own.
There's something valuable about being in community and hearing other people share, not in a trauma bonding negative way, but I think it elicits hope that they're able to continue on and I can also by seeing a pattern of that. And I'm sure there were people there in different timelines of when their loved one had passed. So you're hearing from different perspectives. So from that group, what was the road to you actually writing a book?
Well, when I was a teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry, kind of, just the stuff that teenagers think about. I'm, all alone in the world. Oh, I just wanted to say the other thing about a grief support group is that when you're with a group of other people and they're all sharing their stories, you feel the connection because one of the things with grief, as you well know, is you can feel really isolated. Like nobody can understand what I'm going through. And to some degree, maybe people can't. I mean, you were talking about being at the funeral and not really getting the depth of the pain. But when you're in a group like that, everybody that's there, you're hearing, wow, they're experiencing it like I'm experiencing it. And there's differences, but there's that shared human experience. And it's really great to not feel isolated that way, to just know there's people out there who know exactly what I'm going through.
I would absolutely agree with that profound grief. And you can feel alone in a crowded room. It's the lack of connection. And it's
Right.
very difficult to manage because it seems like it's looming all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I remember a couple months after Susan died, I wanted to go see the new Terminator movie was out. It was like the second one with the liquid guy. And I really wanted to see it. And some people invited me to come join them, but I don't think they knew my wife. They didn't know that my wife had died. And so I went to see it with them and everybody's being social. And I felt so alone. I mean, that memory is still very sharp for me. Just how, I mean, we're talking like 1991, right? Just how alone I felt with these people because I couldn't talk about my wife with them. I couldn't talk about my grief. it was hard. I
Mm,
enjoyed the movie, but I didn't enjoy being with those people. I would have been better off going alone. So
okay, because sometimes people beside you being so sociable makes the isolation even more intense.
yeah, yeah. I think you never feel as alone as you do if you're alone with other people, as you said. So your question about how I came to write the book. So I was writing poetry and as a teenager, and it just sort of seemed like the right thing to start doing. I was keeping a journal, but sometimes I'd start to write poetry because it just seemed to be able to help me express what I was feeling in a way that journaling couldn't. It was just like journaling was kind of like I was explaining to myself what I was feeling. But when I was writing poems, it was different. It was like a different part of my brain. It was almost like the feelings were coming directly out on the page. You know, and often in poetry, there might be images, not always in my poems, but sometimes. And yeah, it's just a different way of expressing yourself. And it was so healing for me to just look at a piece of paper with something I just written and say, yeah, that's it. That's, you know, I can look at it and like feel some healing just from being able to see in words what I was experiencing. And after a while, you know, I was looking for books that were meaningful to me, and a lot of them really weren't. I think there's better books out now, but at the time, there really weren't any books. I'd read a few pages and it was like, throw it away. What I really wanted was to read other people's poems, and I couldn't find anything like that. And so my therapist said, well, why don't you make your own? So I started on this project making my own poems, but I put ads in the newsletters of several organizations. The Unitarian Church had a newsletter, I mean, a national one. And so I put ads there, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Center. I put an ad, they had a paper newspaper, you know, all these places had paper. The internet was like America Online was the internet at the time.
And that's
And
dial up on a phone line.
yeah, exactly. With the modem. And so, yeah, so I put ads in these things. And what I said was I was looking for poems that didn't have to be like high literary quality. What I was looking for was, did they express what the writer wanted to express? And did they make me feel something? And I got 200 responses. 200 poems from a bunch of different people, Portugal, England, you know, Canada, all over the US, Australia. And I mean, I was really shocked. I have a cat here. I don't know if you're hearing her. So, yeah, so I started sorting through these poems and just found not all, I didn't like all of them, but I ended up settling on 65 poems from 45 different people. Some of the poems were mine, like 7 of the 65 were my poems. Um, and I kind of sorted them according to, so this all happened starting about a year and a half or so after my first wife died. I was writing almost from the day she died, but I started putting this book together. I sorted the poems I made chapters based on kind of how they related to different aspects of my own experience. Like the first chapter, I ended up calling Someone Died Today. And a lot of the chapter headings were either lines or titles of poems that I'd received. So Someone Died Today was the name of a poem from a woman I knew whose brother had died from AIDS, which at the time was big. And it was a really simple poem she'd never written before. I was the only one she'd shared it with. And she gave it to me for the book. And it was really simple. No one would call it good poetry, but it was powerful. And so I included that. So I had these different chapters that went from Someone Died Today, which were poems about the day that someone died, all the way through a chapter called The Breath of Great Spirit, which were poems that kind of had to do with what I now know is called intention. Just, you know, kind of getting to where you can integrate this loss into your life and sort of begin to feel whole again. But there was a hole in between, you know, a chapter called The Raging Storm, which was just about that after someone dies often. I mean, there's just so much intensity. You're just like, in a ship lost at sea in a raging storm. And you don't know if or where you're going to ever wash up. There was another chapter called But You Elude Me, because there was this long period of just Cray, just missing her, not, just kind of plodding through my life, not caring about anything, but just looking for her and not finding her. That experience that, many of your viewers have probably had, of walking down the street and you think you see them,
Yeah.
and then you realize it wasn't them, it was somebody else that maybe had the same hair or whatever. So there's that. I had dreams with her, like really vivid dreams. One where she told me about her dying from her point of view, which was incredibly healing for me to have that. Not everybody has those experiences. And I guess I should say, because I know not everybody has it, just because you didn't doesn't mean that there's something wrong. I know I'm not the only one that maybe talks about having those kinds of experiences of reconnecting after death in some way. Doesn't happen to everybody. Can't say why it happened to me. It just did.
Thank you. I have a couple of things I'd like to read, and then I have some poems if you're interested in reading them in this conversation. For Susan, whose deathless love inspired this book, her gift to me and mine to her, and for all the contributors, this book only exists because of your voices. Thank you. What comes to mind when you hear that now, Mike?
I mean, that was what was behind this book. There's actually 2 editions to the book. The first one was published in 1993 or 4, and that one just had the first part of that, because that really was what it was for me. It was this book was my gift to her and her gift to me, I felt. But the second one, I really wanted to thank the contributors to the book as well, and so I added to that.
Thank you. I'm going to read something, a note to the reader.
Uh-huh.
Some of the poems in this book may elicit a strong emotional response. That is one of the goals of this book, to help you identify and express what you are feeling. The authors and artists in this book contributed their work in the hope that they might help you heal as their creative expression helped them to heal. And we got into that, and I forgot to really talk about the title of the book, and the artwork that is on here is beautiful.
Yeah.
Voices of the Grieving Heart. How did you come about this picture that you have on the book?
Well, we were looking for my second wife and I. So I remarried 2 years and change, 2.25 years or so after my first wife died. And it would just happen that way. We can talk more about this later because I want to answer your question. But basically, the woman I'm married to now was next door neighbors to the best friend of my first wife, although I never met her until a few months after Susan had died. And so I went over to visit the best friend, and I met Yvonne, my current wife, and we were just friends for a long time because I couldn't be in a relationship. And but we were friends, and eventually it became more. So here we are. And there's a couple things I'd like to say about that later on when we get to it. But
Okay.
just to answer your question, I had this idea of sort of an image of kind of like men around a fire, because I'm a guy, right? Like men around a fire, and sort of, I mean, this was my image. And I had talked to somebody about could they create something like this, but nobody really could quite get what I wanted. Basically around a fire, and there'd be smoke from the fire, and the smoke would sort of be forming into a person, maybe a woman, something. That was sort of my image, but something that looked healing up in the smoke. Well, Yvonne is like this amazing researcher, and she was looking around on the internet, and she found this image for sale on Etsy. And we contacted the artist. And she mostly does like Divine Mother type of images, all different kinds. Some of them look very maybe Mesoamerican, some of them maybe look African, but that's what she does is Divine Mothers. I've forgotten her name, but I can give her a shout out if it's I know it's here on the first page. I'll just do that for her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Claudia Olivos, Olivos Art Studio.
Okay.
So Yvonne found this image and we contacted the artist and we told her, and it was just like, it wasn't what I was looking for, but as soon as we saw it, it was like, oh, that's the one.
Mm,
I just love this kind of nurturing image of this woman stitching a heart back together.
yeah,
And what I love about it is it's not like that heart is going to be whole again. It's always going to have the scar, right?
absolutely.
But it was just really beautiful. So we contacted her and she was willing to let me use the image on the cover in return for 6 copies of the book. So it was great. It was within my budget for sure.
For sure.
And so that was wonderful. So that's how it ended up there. And then I have a friend who's done a lot of cover design, so he took that image and designed the cover for it.
So
So
let's get into some of the, if you don't mind reading some poems that I'll give you the page number for. And then after you read those, share whatever you would like about that particular poem. Is that okay?
yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Let's go to page number 24, and it's titled Etched in My Brain.
Okay. Yeah, I'll read it first and then we can talk a little about it.
Okay.
Face down on the bed, my son, arms outstretched and legs grown cold. One tainted pill did you in at 24 years old. I quickly turned you over and looked deep into your eyes. He's gone, I screamed. He's gone, with anguished, high-pitched cries. I peered into your open mouth with vomit on its side, and horror overtook me then, as part of me had died. I ran around the kitchen like wounded, helpless prey. I cursed out loud, then whimpered some when they took you away. I carry this etched in my brain and guilt. Since I last checked, a father's job is to love, but mostly to protect. And that's by a man named Ken Slezerick. And what happened was, obviously, he'd found his son dead. He'd taken a fentanyl pill. He was having some back pain at work, and a friend gave him a couple of pain pills.
Hmm.
And they knew that he hadn't killed himself because there were 2 pills and one was there was still one on the nightstand. So he knew that he had just, taken one for the back pain. They found out later why he'd taken it. So it was an accidental fentanyl overdose, which is so common now.
Yeah. And that is why I wanted to read that, because sometimes people think you think poetry and it's going to be lofty, and people to know that their story is part of this work that you're doing here, so they
Yeah.
can see themselves being identified. I think that is very important when you think about what I want to help soothe my soul, to know that this speaks across different people and experiences.
Yeah. I think I'd say in general categories of how people die, I'd say the only category that's not in here is I didn't have anyone whose loved one was murdered. But drug overdose, Alzheimer's, old age, cancer, accidents, all kinds of different things. Suicide, too many suicides, I'm sorry to say, but
Yes.
like 6 or 7 people in here who's
Mm.
died of suicide.
Thank you for mentioning that, so people know that it is part of the journey. Could you read After the Service? This starts on page 34, Mike.
Yeah, so this is by Nori Rost. And I will say this one, her brother did die by suicide.
Mm.
And she's a Unitarian minister, so she'd done a lot of services, but she had never done one for her own brother, or for her own family member. And she was very close with him. So
I can relate to that, being an ordained minister. When my mother-in-law passed, my husband was in their hometown with his brothers, and they were making decisions, and he called me from the funeral home, and he said, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I was at lunch." He said, "Well, I need to talk to you." I was like, "Okay." He said, "Well, we're preparing my mother's service." Her name was Barbara, "And we'd like to know if you can do this service." And I was like, "Excuse me? What? I'm sorry. What did you say, darling?" And he said, we would think that our mom would want you to do this service." And I said yes. I wanted to say no because I wanted to be this grieving wife next to her husband. But I did have a wonderful relationship with my mother-in-law. And preparing for that service was what I thought was gonna be the most difficult experience in my life. And preparing that, eulogy and sending it to another minister, asking them to read that, and I took the day off and sent the children to school and allowed myself to break down because I knew when I was doing that service, I needed to manage my emotions because at that point, I needed to be Minister Tina to that family. And quite the shifting in my perspective to have done services for other things, but this was a different experience, and there's so much to give of yourself and sacrifice in that.
yeah, so I think I mean, I'm about to read it, but I know this experience yourself, I'm sure. I tend to get very emotional when I'm reading these poems, even though I've read them 100 times. It's just, it still brings out, I can't say it's grief exactly, but it just brings out emotion in me. And so we'll see what happens as I read this because yeah, they're just how it is for me.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so it's called After the Service, where I stood and nervelessly eulogized my brother, my voice breaking, not, I'm sorry, my voice not breaking once, not even once, while my mom and sisters wept so helplessly. A man comes to shake my hand to tell me what a terrific job I had done. He says to me, "I hope you take the time to grieve yourself." I looked at him dazedly. It is impossible to describe this grief to anyone. I could say I was in mourning, that I was grieving my loss. But what sentence would hold the description of the form grief takes now? The gasping, hyperventilating sense of it, the bending over at the waist, while simultaneously beating my breast with closed fist. The howling, that is so loud and fierce, even with my head buried in a pillow, that sometimes I'm surprised the neighbors haven't called the police. Or the way my heart hurts with such an angry, desperate, pounding cadence that I want to reach inside my chest cavity and rip it out. I smile blankly at the man, a stranger, and assure him that I do. This poem in particular gets me every single time. It's just powerful.
It is very descriptive, and to think all those things are happening in a split second in your mind when someone's coming to elicit what they think is the best advice that you need to hear, and
Right.
you're just trying to get through that moment and be sane with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The beating of the chest and the howling. I cried so much, and I've mentioned this before, I thought I was gonna dehydrate. I didn't know I could keep producing tears. I
Yeah.
had never experienced that level of pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember once, my wife had a CD that it was kind of a new agey thing. It was like this sort of kind of cool new agey music with, it was called Glacier Bay. So it was all like sounds of wildlife up
Mm.
in Glacier Bay, Alaska. And there's a point where this music is going and these wolves are howling. And I just started, I still remember that, Just, oh man, yeah. It was like those wolves just did it to me.
I can see that. Wow. We have just a couple more left, Mike. Page 113, what they want to hear.
Yeah, I like this one too. This is by a woman named Paula Porter, whose husband died from a cancer that came from Agent Orange. He was a Vietnam vet.
Oh, wow.
People say I'm handling it well, coping, adjusting, but they don't know I go to sleep every night hugging a pillow, pretending it's you, and praying not to wake up to another morning alone. People want to know how I'm doing, making a new life, going on. And I give a sad smile and say, it's rough. Thanks for asking. I'm managing. Words they want to hear. People comment how strong and brave I've been through it all. Your cancer, your fight for life, your death. But they can't understand that my strength and bravery and hopes were buried with you.
Hmm. How does that relate to your story, Mike? Your journey in grief?
Yeah, I think, and I would imagine it's a common experience for a lot of people. I mean, it just, when people ask, how are you doing? What do you tell them? I mean, all you can say is, I'm doing okay. Because you can't, I mean, it's kind of like the previous poem. I mean, you just can't tell most people, at least. Yeah, I just can't, I'm screaming every night. I was wailing for an hour this morning because I missed her so much. So you just say, yeah, I'm managing, I'm still breathing. That's something.
What difference do you think or impact would make if we told people exactly how we were doing when they
It's a good question. I think, I think the fear is that we'll lose friends, that they won't be able to handle it. And in some cases, it might be true. I mean, it really depends on the friend. I had a couple people I could talk to about it. But even so, I kind of didn't want to use them up, so to speak,
Mm,
and that's what was so great about having a support group to go to is I could just dump it all there and not have to have my friends listening to the same thing for months on end, which was, I miss her, you know, I don't know what to do. I'll never be happy again, or at least I'm afraid I'll never be happy again. So it wasn't that I didn't talk to a select few people about it, but I needed to have other ways to take care of myself.
thank
And
you.
most people, yeah, I would just say, yeah, I'm fine. And especially casual people, casual acquaintances. I'm doing okay.
So the casual acquaintances, I understand. Do you think we're doing our friends a disservice by not sharing more with them about our grief?
I think the best thing that a friend can do for us is to just say, if you want to talk about it, I'm here to listen.
Open the door.
Because I know, I think none of us want to be a burden on our friends. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, I think it goes both ways. I mean, maybe you talk about it and see how it goes.
That was 100% the
Yeah.
burden to my friends. I didn't care. They were getting all this work. If
Uh-huh.
they asked, I remember a group of people I would have lunch with, and every day, and I knew they cared. They had been to my home. These are people I had lunch with every day at work.
Uh-huh.
And they said, "How are you doing?" And I was like, "Trash, hot garbage." This it was 3 months before I came back to work. And when they asked me, I said, "In fact, when you ask me how I'm doing, there's a whirlwind going on in my head, and I'm trying to say, do I tell you I want Mark to come back? I don't know what this looks like." And then I just say, "Hi." I don't even answer the question. And I said, "The best thing you could do because I know you love me is to ask, how am I doing this moment?" That's all
Mhm.
I can grasp in my mind. The question, "How are you doing?" seems so vast that I cannot even handle it. And when I told them that, they changed the questioning. They went to ask me, "How are you doing right now?" And that
That
was
was,
palatable.
yeah. No, that was really wise of you to say it that way. I think most people, it doesn't occur to, I mean, that is a great question. And that's a question, I'm a grief educator through David Kessler. I haven't done it the last few months, but I spent probably 2.5 years volunteering with him most Mondays on he has a Zoom group called he has a program called Tender Hearts, and on Mondays they have online grief support, and he's got like 20 breakout rooms for different kinds of deaths or experiences: death of a parent, death by fentanyl, death by addiction. They've had a death by murder one too, actually. Death of a spouse in different age groups, death of the child, different age groups of the children. So anyway, so I volunteered with that, and that really is something that we talked about a lot, is to just ask, how are you doing today? How are you doing right now? And not just how are you doing? Because as you said, there's no way to answer that. But I didn't have that. I didn't have that wisdom then. I was just blowing through it as best I could. So
You fared well. We're going to go to 141, to heal, which is appropriate based on where we are in our conversation.
Yeah. And so, as I said, we're sort of moving through the grief journey here. The first one that I read was about the day that this man's son died, and the next one was from the raging storm. Just that the violent emotions that we feel, or the violence of emotion, maybe I should say, and kind of, yeah. So this woman has a few poems in here. And when she was 16, she found her mother dead from suicide.
Mm.
And yeah, she's got another poem in here about that. Grief, deeply embedded in a soul, can twist and turn, can swell and strew poison. Let it go, you say. Move on, you say. Vent the tears and anger. Move on, you say. Yell at God. Yell at you for leaving me. Move on, you say. Look again into the sky and see the clouds. Smell the rain. Touch another human in a loving manner. Begin to heal.
What comes to mind reading that now?
Actually, what comes to mind reading that now is a little more backstory with this woman, is that she also had a series of miscarriages a little bit later in her life. And yeah, one thing with this book is I went back to try, when I did this second edition, which was in the fall of 2021. I went back and to contact the original contributors. This one had twice as many contributors and more than twice as many poems. But I went back to contact the original contributors, and I found out through a series of research projects that she had died. But I ended up getting in touch with her little sister, and her little sister had done some writing too. And one of her poems about Monica is in this book.
Wow.
Because she didn't know they had been estranged for a long time. And she didn't know what Monica had gone through in her life, because they hadn't talked. And even when Monica was dying of cancer, she contacted her and said, she just didn't want the sister around, even though there was nothing specific that had happened. It wasn't like there was bad blood. She just, I don't know. So anyway, I think a lot about that, because this woman had a very challenging life. But she died, I guess, knowing she was loved by people, including her sister, even though her sister didn't get to see her. So that's what I think about with this, because this was a woman who went through so much, and yet she found ways to heal it herself.
And we do experience a lot of pain in this lifetime.
Yeah.
Do you think we have a choice to embrace it, or to stay in a place where we never live life full again?
I think we have that choice. I think for some people, it maybe takes more work than others to make that choice. I think we do have that choice. And it doesn't mean, one of the things that I learned is that it doesn't mean letting go of the person you love to learn how to live again. It just means accepting that there is room for more love, really. And there was a story that I told you, we messaged back and forth on LinkedIn some months ago. And there was a story I said I wanted to share with you because of it. I was reminded by whatever it was you posted. And so maybe now is a good time to share that story.
Okay, before the last poem, or?
Yeah, I'll share that, then we'll go to the last poem.
Okay, go ahead.
Um, so about a year into going to those grief support groups every week, a woman came one whatever night of the week it was, um, and I hadn't met her before. Well, I had met her, but actually years before in a completely different context. And her husband had died, and it had been a couple of years. She remarried a couple of months before she showed up, but she was in the group because she just felt she needed a tune-up. And and one of the things that she shared about her second husband was that when she knew that he was the right one, when she could cry in his arms for her first husband. And I said, I hope I'll meet somebody like that. And she said, you won't settle for less.
I can agree to all of that.
Yeah. And that's when I knew that Yvonne was right for me, when I could cry in her arms over Susan.
I picked this last poem because it carries the same name as my late husband.
Mark.
Yes, and it's spelled the same way. So if you would read this, I think this is a fitting transition into where our lives have gone since the passing of our loved.
Dear Mark, son, friend, brother, student of philosophy, artist, dancer, lover, realist and dreamer, traveler to exotic places, wishing now to be a UFO. As you prepare to fly away, I bow in gratitude. You are a shining light, my teacher, my patient, my student, my absolver. It was heaven to be forgiven, the blessing of a second chance bestowed. Go then, take off in your blue and silver rocket, explore the galaxies in all your splendor, elegant and bold. Go in peace and safety. You are protected by an awesome golden light. I join everyone who loves you in wishing you Godspeed. A part of us goes with you. A part of you remains in our hearts. You have given us so much in the receiving of our love. Your tears have told us all we need to know. Heart of hearts, rose quartz, pink and silver skies, sea green eyes. Dear Mark, goodbye.
Hmm. There is so much of that that speaks to me. The sea green eyes. My husband always talked about the UFOs. And I'm going to guess "Take Off in Your Blue and Silver Rocket" is a line from a song that I'm accustomed to hearing, but there's just so much of that. When I saw that, I had to hear you read that poem. Thank you. We
Yeah,
say goodbye, but you mentioned earlier, we always keep them with us. In the idea of dating, and you talked about being able to cry in your second wife's arms. What was dating like for you compared to what you thought it.
it was, I didn't, well, I did date a little bit, but I wasn't looking initially for any big commitments. It was just, I was 34 years old, so I was normal. But yeah, it was interesting. There was one woman who I dated a couple times. I really liked her. And it wasn't until the second date that I'd noticed that her arm was a little bit deformed. And I couldn't tell her that I didn't want to have a relationship with her because I just didn't want, even though that was not a life-threatening thing. She'd had cerebral palsy or something when she was, not cerebral palsy, but cerebral something. So it was a birth defect. But so, it wasn't life-threatening. But I just felt like I need to start with someone who's whole, physically healthy and whole. I just don't want to go through. And I don't know. I felt maybe a little bit of shame around it. Maybe still do, but it was just not the right. I just needed to, if I was going to start dating again, I just needed to know that at least I'm starting off with someone who had no medical issues. that they had to deal with. And what comes, we can't predict the future. And I'm
I want
committed
to
now.
say something right there. What
Yeah.
you mentioned is very common to widows and widowers when they're dating. I've spoken with people whose spouses passed of diabetes, high blood pressure. The idea of recoupling with someone that is known not well is frightening. So they tend to want someone that's as active or mobile as they are because we've traveled that road. Obviously, the likelihood of someone passing again is high, but we don't want it's very difficult often for someone who has been widowed to repartner with someone that has any type of sickness because it's very triggering to them. So that is more common than not from speaking with hundreds of different people that are widowed and re-entering the dating world and what that landscape looks like. So you're not alone in that concept.
Interesting. Yeah, and the other thing for me, I think, was I didn't realize how much of a caregiver role I had taken on with my first wife,
Exactly.
just day to day. It wasn't like she was dying of cancer and I needed to be the caregiver, and that's just as hard. And then when you don't have that, you miss the person horribly, and there's also often a kind of a relief that you're not in that role anymore.
Correct.
And I didn't realize how much I was in that role because she'd been that way from the day I met her. And it was just sort of natural. If we were taking a walk and we were going uphill, I'd kind of put my hand on her back to help push her up the hill because she'd get out of breath too quickly otherwise, because her heart was only maybe, 60, 70% functional. So yeah, I just needed to start clean, if at least what clean in whatever that meant to me. So yeah, there was that. But the thing with Yvonne was that we were just friends. In fact, I knew someone else whose wife had died from kidney issues, and he had, over the months that they were going to dialysis, he became friendly with the woman at the bed next door whose husband was on dialysis, and both of their spouses died, and they ended up just like getting married. The
Wow.
two, the two survivors, because they'd been through so much, they'd already become very close. And so with Yvonne and me, it wasn't romantic at first, and I told her I'm not interested in a relationship right now. And she said, well, that's good because neither am I. But we went off camping together. We went on picnics, we just did all the stuff that friends might do together. And then at a certain point, we realized we wanted more. I'll just share here. Yvonne is always joking about my marriage proposal. There's a long story behind this that I won't get into, but basically what happened was I was at a Chinese restaurant. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do about her, whether I wanted to stay with her or not, and I decided that I did. And then I opened my fortune cookie and it said, "Now is the time to go after what you want." And so what I said to her was, I mean, she gives me such a hard time about this. I said, "I'm not ready to get married, but when I am, I'd like it to be you." And
She
she
should
said,
give you a hard time.
"You should, I know." And she said, "Are you sure? Why don't you think about it for 3 days and come back to me and tell me whether you're still serious about that?" And I
Like a
was.
contract negotiation.
So, and we got married the next year. But yeah, I mean, that was all I could give her at that point. I just couldn't commit to more. And there were a lot of times earlier on when, I mean, we'd have something set up and I just say, I can't. I need to, I didn't say stand you up, but I needed to stand her up because my grief was there and I just needed to attend to it. And it was really hard for her. And, but she had a friend, a really close friend who said, I think he's worth waiting for. So just try to be patient. And just great advice, I think. Um,
Obviously. Mike, if you were able to retain all the information you know now,
mhm.
and you were able to talk to yourself the day after Susan passed, what would you tell?
I think knowing what I know now and also understanding a lot more about grief because of the training that I did with David Kessler and all, if I were to say to myself then, just it's all going to be okay. You're going to meet somebody new. It's going to be great. You're going to love her. She'll love you. You're going to have a long, happy marriage. I'd say, I don't want any of that. I just want Susan back. That's what I would have said at the time. And so I think the only thing that I could say to myself, the understanding now that I really needed to go through that journey, just, it's going to be okay. You will be okay. Just, that's it. It's going to be hard, but you will get through it. And, will I ever be, if I were to ask future me, will I ever be happy again? I'd probably say, yeah, you will, but I can't really tell you how you're going to find your way there. You just have to find your way there. People need to go through the hard stuff in order for their heart to crack open enough and eventually be open to new happiness. But the only thing that I would say is I think the biggest fear that I had, and I've heard from a lot of other people, is that I'm afraid that if I date again, if I find happiness again, that I'll forget Susan or whoever your loved one was, and I don't want to ever forget them. And so the one thing that I can say is you will never forget them.
Agreed.
You will always love them. You'll always have that place in your heart for them. You'll carry them through everything. But that doesn't mean that you can't be happy again and have them and that memory and that experience be a part of it.
I would agree. Mike, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've asked you a lot of questions. Any questions you have for me?
No, I don't think so. I think we've had a nice conversation. Yeah. And the only thing I'll say is, Voices of the Grieving Heart. You can get it on Amazon. If you hate Amazon, you can order it from your favorite independent bookstore. They'll get it for you. Yeah, just you've heard a few of the poems. There's 150 poems in there from 80 different people, and it's like sitting in a giant support group and having everybody just, share their experience, and you just feel loved. I'd say, you just feel witnessed. You feel that people know who you are. And a lot of the people who contributed to this book told me they were contributing it because they were hoping that what they wrote would help someone else. So.
Thank you. I'm going to say something to our listeners, and then I would like you to close this out with any final words, advice, or anything you would like to share.
Okay.
Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I am sorry for your loved one that is no longer here, that has driven you here, but I'm glad you found us. And I am so grateful to be able to share Mike's book with you and the warmth that it shares and the comfort that you'll find in each page.
I think what I'll do is I'll share the very first poem in this book as my closing statement. It's called Voices, and this poem is what led to the title Voices of the Grieving Heart. It's by a woman named Mara Titel Shade. Poetry born from the pain of grieving, inseparable from the pain of growing, death creating life. A flower blossoms from your fertilizer. Muse, brother, one and the same. Your spirit, ever present, gives me courage to write. We talk in the land of dreams. I rejoice knowing you continue to live. Our poem's a testimonial to your existence.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. It's nice talking with you.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.